Hi, my name is David Suiters and welcome to my home apiary. Today I'm going to be lighting my smoker and performing a hive inspection. This is part of the University of Florida's Master Beekeeper program, and it is the practical assessment for the apprentice level. So let's go ahead and get started. This is my smoker, and my fuel of choice today to help create the smoke is just going to be some dried leaves, some twigs. So I'm going to take my torch, light it, put a little bit of the dried material into the smoker, and just try to get it ignited enough to allow it to start burning everything else. And I will gradually add more vegetation as this stuff begins to ignite. I actually like seeing a nice flame come up just because it proves to me something's burning. And I'll just begin gradually adding a little bit at a time. I'm looking for a nice, thick, rich, maybe creamy colored smoke. It's actually really nice when it starts breathing at you. Whenever you squeeze the bellow, it's kind of fun to hear it do that. Beekeepers find odd things to be fun, so this is a nice, good smoke. I don't need to add a ton. I'm only going to be going through one hive, but if you pack these things right, they'll last a really long time. Once the smoke is nice and thick, you can pack it down a little bit. I don't want to extinguish the flame or anything, or the burning, excuse me. Hopefully there's no flame in there right now. But that's a nice healthy smoke, and that should easily last me for what I want to do here right now. So before I get into the hive, I'm going to put on my veil just to protect my face. I've been stung near the eye before, and that was not fun, but it was certainly a learning experience. All right, so let's reposition the camera here and we'll get into a hive. Well, we're actually going to get into the little small guy right here, but before we get into it, I'm going to use the taller stack right next to it just to give a little orientation as to the different components of the hive. Every hive has multiple pieces to it. This bottom support, or the foundation of the hive, we call a bottom board. Mine happens to be a screened bottom board because the main surface on the bottom is made out of a mesh screen to help with ventilation of the hive, which is really helpful in the hot Florida summer. Also helps with some pest management. The boxes above that foundation, that bottom board, are this is a deep body. This is a medium body. This is also a medium body up here. So this hive has two of those. The bodies are where the bees build their nest, raise baby bees, store some resources. We'll look at all of those in a bit. There's another component right here. It's a thin layer of lighter colored wood. That's a queen excluder. I'm not going to take the hive apart, but here's an example of what one looks like. It's a metal grid. Sometimes these come in plastic. But this queen excluder is intended to exclude the queen from going a particular direction. The queen's body is so big she can't fit through the excluder. So in a hive like this, if I've got the queen excluder at this level, I'm excluding her down into this area. This is where I want her laying her eggs. I don't want her coming into this top box because that is where I want to keep some fresh surplus honey reserves that I might eventually want to take. So I want to keep it clean and free of any egg laying or anything else like that. Above the bodies, you have the top cover. In this case, this is a migratory top cover. Same with the hive over here that we're about to look at. Migratory top covers are designed in a way that allow you to stack the hives closer together, which is really helpful for people who migrate their hives from one location to another, and they've got to save some space and be really efficient with that. There's one more component of the hive, but we can't see it until we actually open it up. So let's go ahead and prepare to do that. All right, let's reorient there. So prior to opening the hive, I want to take my smoker, which once again still has a nice healthy amount of smoke coming out of it. I just want to lightly give the guys in the front porch here just a little bit of a puff, just to let them know I'm coming. The smoke, you never want to overuse it, but it's really nice to have just in the event it's needed. I'm about to use this handy little contraption called a hive tool, creatively named, and it allows us to pry up certain things that maybe the bees have glued down with one of the resources that we get from a hive called propolis. Propolis is a really sticky resin. Some little ladies right there. A little sticky resin that they take from the vegetation they're foraging on, and they use the propolis to seal cracks and a number of other things. Some people believe it helps keep the hive free from certain diseases and things like that. I open the top here, I'm just gonna give them a little puff on the top as well. And let's crack this guy open. I'm gonna use the hive tool. I use it to loosen any loose pieces. Once again, lots of bees in here. There are 3 types of bees in a honeybee colony. You have the queen bee, which most colonies typically only have 1. Some exceptions will have more than that. But one queen bee, she's a female, obviously. She lays the eggs and she's responsible for creating the population in the hive. You have the worker bees, and those are female bees, and they make up the majority of all the bees that you're gonna see in a colony. And you also have male bees, and those are the drones. And hopefully we'll get an up close look at what some of those might look like here in a second. But what I'm gonna do first is pull out a frame or 2 and see what we might be able to find in there. There's lots of bees on top here. I'm just gonna try to encourage them down into the frames a little bit. It's a very calm hive. I don't really need to worry too much about smoking anything right here. But now I'm gonna use my hive tool, and I'm just gonna come in here. Oh, hold on. Maybe I want to give him a little bit more smoke. I think they wanted to say, hey, who is this guy and what's he about to do? So I'm going to use the hive tool, and the propolis glues these frames I'm about to show you into place. And so having the tool to help you lever these things apart a little bit is really, really helpful. I don't know how I'd get some of these frames out if I didn't have a tool sometimes, because they are seriously glued down. So this is the other part of the hive. The component is called a frame. And in the frame, this is where the bees will end up drawing out their wax comb. Wax is another resource of the hive. It can be used to make candles, but the bees use it to, well, build comb, store honey, store resources, make new bees. And this is a beautiful example of a nicely drawn comb. The bees on this particular frame, let me bring it over because it's a great example of what we call brood. This is most of what we see on here is, let's see if I can balance this properly. Most of what we see in here, these are cells that have been capped over. It's a beautiful covering of what we call pupa that are inside these capped cells, and all the bees that are kind of on top of this frame are just kind of tending to these cells and kind of getting ready for these pupa to hatch out into adult bees. As we look at this particular frame, we can see, or this particular scene, we can see a couple of things. There's a really large bee right up here. That would be a drone. He's a lot fatter and bigger than the other bees. So he's one of the males of the hive. Pretty much every other bee on this frame is a female, exception of maybe one or two. Let me see if I can flip over real quick and see if there's anything in particular on the other side. Mostly the same kind of stuff. So let me pull this guy, put him back in the hive. Actually, just to create some space, I'm gonna leave him out just for a moment and give me some working room as I maybe pull another frame, see what we can see. I've mentioned propolis and wax as resources of the hive. Some of the other resources, the most common is going to be honey. That's what most people will recognize as a resource. On this particular frame, we've got a handful of things happening that are kind of exciting. Let me bring this one over for some show and tell. So we saw the capping, the covered cappings that were pupating worker bees. On this particular frame, we've got a couple different other types of capped brood, or uncapped in a sense. See this little thing right here? That is a queen cup. This is where they might, if the colony had a need for it, would try to raise a new queen bee. Queen cells need to be larger than normal cells in a hive because the queen bee is a much larger bee than the other ones. She's not currently on this frame. She's probably busy laying eggs somewhere. Eggs, which you're not gonna be able to see on this video, show up as, they start out as really tiny rice looking white things. And so maybe a little piece of rice in the back of a cell, and after about 3 days it hatches into a larva, or into the larval stage of the honeybee. In this particular frame, especially in this area right here, if these ladies would be so kind, there's some little white grub looking things in there, and those are the larval stage of the bee. And a lot of these worker bees are feeding them. They feed them a combination of pollen, sometimes in the form of bee bread. They'll give them honey. Sometimes they use something called royal jelly, which is primarily used as the diet of the queen for when she's being raised. But those are various stages of bee development there with the different larval ages. Over here we see another kind of capped brood. These capped cells actually stick out from the comb itself, and they have more of a bullet shape. And these are indicative of drones that are in their pupa stage. And when they come out, obviously they're larger as an adult than the normal worker bee, so they need a larger cell to pupate in as well. So that's why these tend to stick out from the comb, whereas ones like this over here tend to be a little flatter. On the perimeter of all of this is nectar. Nectar is uncured honey in a sense. In fact, this side of the frame has a lot of it in there. It's hard to tell, but some of these cells have a glistening fluid in there. As that nectar gets dehydrated, the cells will be capped over with a layer of wax, and that'll be honey that the hive is ready to use in whatever way it would like. So this entire side is full of nectar. Kind of gives it that orange color against everything else. See if I can pull one more and get an example of something else in here. I'll give them another quick, just to remind them that I'm still their friend. Bees and people can certainly be friends. Except for that one. He just tried to go up my shirt. Oh, he's trying again. Hey, calm now. if they're trying to go up your shirt, just give them a quick puff and maybe they'll go away. Once again, as I do a hive inspection, I'm looking for the primary signs that the hive is healthy. It has plenty of bees, which is great. It has, in this case, there's lots of eggs on this frame. There's lots of larvae as well. None of them have been capped on this side, but this is a pretty fresh laid frame by the queen. As long as I see eggs, I know the queen has been here at least within the last 3 days, which is always good. So as I do my hive inspections, I want to make sure that they've got a proper amount of nectar or honey stored away. I want to make sure they've got some pollen stored away, because the pollen is really necessary as they're trying to raise these baby bees. It's just as important as having a good amount of nectar in there. And this hive's in really good shape. I don't want to disturb her too much, so I'll just assemble her carefully back together. And though I didn't see the queen, she is certainly in there and she is certainly active. The hive is happy, and hopefully as they continue to grow, they will turn into a producing hive. So as I put the top cover back on, I just want to be slightly careful. I don't want to smash any of the bees that are on the edge there. And I don't want to smash any of the ones that are on this cover either. So I'll just give them a light shake down and gently and slowly lower the top cover back on. Replace my little cap up here and tell the ladies good night. So that's your hive inspection for the day, and happy beekeeping.